Hello, I'm Ross Atkins. Welcome to this week's World Have Your Say. Well, last Friday in Ramallah, Mahmoud Abbas gave a speech where he set out why he believes the UN should grant Palestine full membership. Well, since then, he's travelled to New York, and so has Benjamin Netanyahu. Both men will be addressing the General Assembly in the next few hours. We've invited Israeli and Palestinian officials onto today's World Have Your Say to answer your questions. So if you want to speak to them or put a point to them, tweet using the WISE hashtag or call us up on the number on the screen. Well, both of our guests today are at the UN, where we have one camera at our disposal, which is why we'll first get the Palestinian perspective and then the Israeli one. So for the next 10 minutes, Hussam Zomlat, a member of the Palestinian delegation to the UN, will take your questions. If you want to phone up and speak to him or Mark Regev, the Israeli government spokesperson, the number to call will be on the screen repeatedly at 01144 2070 83 72 72. Well, first of all, Mr. Zomlat, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And our first guest to speak to you is Elizabeth. She's in Washington, D.C. She's a blogger, and she also works for the Commentary magazine. It's Bethany, I apologize. Bethany, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. So the woman who delivered the letter to Ban Ki-moon in the Palestinian Authority was the mother of 5 terrorists. And this, I think, was a really interesting choice for you to highlight this citizen above all others of the Palestinians. Why was she chosen? And in the Palestinian state, will this continue to be the kind of person that is honored along with terrorists who have squares named after them?
Mr. Zomlat, would you like to respond? Why was that woman chosen to present the letter?
Which woman? I can't hear very clearly. Which woman?
The question from...
her name was Latifa Abu Hamid. She delivered the letter to Ban Ki-moon.
No, the letter will be delivered by President Abbas. I don't know what you're talking about. And there is a scheduled meeting at 11:30 East time to really submit the application of Palestine becoming a full member of the United Nations. And the question here is absolutely not why are we submitting such an application now. The question is why haven't we submitted such an application long.
With respect, if I could just jump in and explain, we're expecting Mahmoud Abbas to present the letter shortly before he speaks. He's expected to speak in just over an hour's time. So we might be getting our wires crossed here, Bethany. Is there a second question you would like to ask?
No, there was a procession from the Palestinian Authority, and it was delivered by Latifa Abu Hamid, who is the mother of 5 terrorists. It was a procession, and she was chosen.
You are giving misinformation and disinformation, and I don't accept this.
Okay. So in the future Palestinian state, will squares continue to be named after people who kill Israeli citizens? Is that the kind of people that you would like to honor?
My friend, if you are talking about killing and violence, then I'm sure the numbers and the counts are much higher in our side of the story. I'm sure Palestinians have been murdered by several Israeli officials and several Israeli. And that's your question. That's your question.
No,
we
that's
are
not
the society.
Well, we've given it a good 3 or 4 minutes, so I'm going to try a second question here. Let me bring in Layla, who is a blogger. She writes at Gaza Mum. She joins us from Washington, D.C. as well. Layla, what would be your question to Hussam Zomlat?
Yes, I was wondering, Palestinians everywhere, I think, whether in the diaspora, whether Palestinian citizens in Israel in the 1948 territories, even in Gaza, where I'm from, even though I'm in the United States, are really concerned about the ultimate implications of the statehood bid on their rights. Does this really serve their interests, or is this simply a bid to bolster the popularity of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority?
This bid, Layla, will only enforce our rights and enable us to pursue our rights in the international arena using international organs, international courts, international conventions to ensure that our inalienable, non-negotiable rights are exercised by the Palestinian people. Chiefly among these rights are the right to self-determination, that is having a state of our own, independent, sovereign, on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem its capital, and that those rights include the right of our people to return to their homes and farms and towns that they were unlawfully uprooted from 64 years ago. How that will happen? Because by being part of the international system, by having a state as the unit in the international system that is capable of taking our rights forward by the sole representative body of the Palestinian people, that is the Palestine Liberation Organization. The PLO is going to submit the application today. The PLO shall remain the sole and the only inclusive representative of Palestinians and shall pursue in every manner possible the exercise of our inalienable rights. What we have been doing, Layla, for the last 20 years is trying to use negotiations not to negotiate upon your right or my right, but to try and find ways to implement them, to exercise them. And as you discovered, and as we discovered, regrettably, the Israeli successive governments have used these 20 years to further erode our rights. From unoccupied territories, now the Israelis talk about disputed territories.
And Hussam Somlin, I wonder if Layla is as convinced as you are about Mahmoud Abbas's tactics. Layla, are you?
I mean, I understand why they're going to the United Nations and what they, but I think we as Palestinians are concerned that will the Palestinian Authority or a future Palestine take the place of the PLO in representing refugee rights and their rights to return to historic Palestine, not just the territories. But also, the Palestinian Authority had the ability to use legal mechanisms, and the Palestine Papers showed they stood in the way of the Goldstone Report or the ICJ ruling on the illegality of the routes of the apartheid wall and so on. There's been many examples of the Palestinian Authority collaborating with Israel in this regard. So
Layla?
That's why I think, Palestinians are skeptical. What is this really about? And is it going to safeguard their rights?
Thank you very much, Layla. And Layla writes the Gaza Mom blog, which you'll be able to find very easily if you search for it online. I can see that Allah in Gaza has posted at bbcarabic.com saying President Abbas is a first-class politician. He was able to shuffle his cards to expose America's fickle principles. And Patricia in Costa Rica, posting on bbcmundo.com, says all the founders of the UN are jointly responsible for all of the political problems these people are suffering. It is time to honour this debt. Well, let's shift from Costa Rica to the Netherlands because Asher is joining us. Asher has served previously in the Israeli army. Asher, what question would you like to put to Mr. Zomlot, our guest from the Palestinian delegation at the UN?
Yes, hello, Mr. Zomlot. I would like to pose a pretty simple question. Are you willing, irrevocably, to recognize the state of Israel as a Jewish state?
We have recognized Israel more than 20 years ago, and we affirmed this recognition in the Oslo Accords in 1993. That's 17, 18 years ago. The only problem in this equation that while we have fully recognized Israel as a state on the 1967 borders, Israel has never recognized us. And this has been the real issue, the real asymmetry, that while we were talking to a state with a well-defined borders, in fact, the state that we were talking to were dealing with our land as disputed, and as such, they would want to grab as much land as possible out of that. As for the nature of Israel as a state, this is up to Israel to decide. We hope Israel, or any other state for that matter, and we'd always pursue that as a Palestinian state, would be inclusive, would be democratic, would respect the rights of the minorities, would be a beacon of democracy, would be really a state for all, not only for one race or for one religion or for one creed. This is the city. We're sitting in New York. Come and see this thriving, energetic city. Why it is energetic? Because it's diverse. I don't think we are in the era of calling, England the Protestant state or Italy the Catholic state. It's the era of a state for their citizens and its citizens.
Asher, would you like to respond?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your very eloquent and combative answer, but my question was not answered. Are you willing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state? I repeat, Jewish state.
And I have answered very clearly, this is not even legal, not even political. This is really, my friend, this is designed by your leadership to derail the whole thing. How on earth have you ever had in international relations and international law? And think about it rationally. Let's forget about emotions here. Have you ever heard of a recognition based on a religion? How come? How do you do that? And let me be absolutely frank. Yes, we object to this.
Let's put that point to Asher. Asher, why are you asking for it to be recognized as a Jewish state when hardly any countries in the world associate their existence with a particular religion?
Yes, Iran. It's a Muslim republic.
I didn't say there weren't any. I'm just saying the vast majority don't. So why is it so important to you as an Israeli?
Because Jews have been singled out due to...
And with that, his Skype line has gone, which is a shame. Asher, thank you very much for being with us from the Netherlands. And Mr. Zomlot, we appreciate your time. I know you're very busy at the UN today. In a couple of minutes' time, we're going to speak to Mark Regev, the spokesperson for the Israeli government. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Our guest for the first 10 minutes of the show is Hussam Zomlot, a spokesperson for the Palestinian delegation at the UN. For the next 10 minutes, we're going to speak to Mark Regev, the Israeli government spokesperson. Mr. Regev, thank you for coming on World Have Your Say again.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let me start with an email we've received from Ghana, which is addressed to you, from Lord Adduci on Facebook, who says, vetoing the Palestinian right to statehood is irresponsible and a complete misuse of the veto card. What would you say in response to that?
Well, first of all, it's not clear there has to be a veto at all because, as the Palestinians themselves will tell you, it's not clear they have the numbers on the Security Council. And it's not clear that the majority of nation states represented on the Security Council want to support this unilateral bid for statehood. Everyone wants to see Palestinian statehood emerge as part of a peace process, not something that's just going to contribute to more violence and tension.
But if America does have to veto the Palestinian application for membership, would that be inappropriate considering the majority of countries in the UN support it?
Well, you know how the UN system is. There are 15 members of the Security Council, and to get something past the Security Council, you need 9 positive votes. And it's not clear at all the Palestinians have the numbers, because when we say, and our position is supported by many around the world, when we say the only way to solve this issue is through negotiation, through direct talks. When my Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, invites President Abbas to come to peace talks and Mr. Abbas refuses, I think people understand that that's the real problem.
If you want to speak to Mark Regev, he's live on World Have Your Say here on BBC World News. The number to call is +44 2070 83 72 72. Let's bring in our first guest to speak to you, Mr. Regev. Noor is with us. She's a coordinator for the campaign Palestine 194 and is live from Ramallah. Noor, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I would ask Mr. Regev, will Israel, sir, respect the obligations that earned it a seat at the UN? Israel committed to 2 states and to Resolution 194 that gives Palestinian refugees the right of return. When do you plan on fulfilling your obligations, sir?
Well, to be fair, Israel does support 2 states. And the UN Resolution 242 is clear. Israel is prepared to pull out. We are prepared to pull out of parts of the West Bank. We are clear. We support 2 states. My Prime Minister will say that today. But to be fair, you should read that resolution because it does not say Israel has to pull out and hope for the best. It says Israel should pull out in the framework of peace. And I would ask you, if I may, how do you expect to make peace with Israel if you refuse to talk to Israel?
Noor, would you like to respond?
Well, I think Mr. Regev knows very well that he is ducking the question and ducking the reality here. Where do you want those two states, Mr. Regev? On how much of the West Bank do you want those two states? On 20% of the West Bank? Are you willing to give us that? Or 30 or 40? You already control 50 for the settlement regime. The Israeli government has to be honest, not just with us, but with the world and its own public. Your public is fed up with the settlement enterprise. Your public is fed up with your failed diplomatic campaign, and they know that you've rejected the 1967 borders. You've rejected them as a joke. You've made it difficult even for your most faithful ally, the United States, to defend your position and to work for peace. So really, what two states are you talking about, Mr. Regev?
First of all, I think Palestinians and Israelis should try to talk to each other more calmly. I think we should try to encourage reconciliation, and it's not good, I don't think, to sort of yell at each other. I would say, and I'd raise this question to you if I could. We've had successive Israeli governments, and there was one just 3 years ago that put on the table 67 borders plus swaps, including splitting Jerusalem. And it was the Palestinian side that said no. Now, we are ready to immediately restart the peace talks. My Prime Minister said just yesterday, President Abbas is here in New York with us. Why don't we start the peace process now? And we're still waiting for an answer. How do you expect, and I'd ask you again, how do you expect to negotiate a solution if you don't negotiate?
And I'm going to give Noor a chance to respond to those points after the half past, because we've got a long list of people to speak to you, Mr. Regev, and not a whole lot of time. So, Noor, please be patient. Thank you for your questions. We'll speak to you in a few minutes' time. In the meantime, let's shift from Ramallah to Jerusalem, and we can speak to a guest now, Owen, an Israeli there, a lawyer and a student. Owen, what would you like to ask your government spokesperson?
Yeah, Mr. Regev, I want to go back to a subject that came up with your Palestinian colleague a few minutes ago. You've called on the Palestinians to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. You've said that our Prime Minister will make that request, that demand, in his speech tonight. The question is, what does that term mean? What's our government's position on the meaning, on the definition of the term Jewish state that we're asking the Palestinians to recognize? And is the content of that definition something that would be up to negotiation?
It's good you raised that question because it came up in the previous segment. We are talking about recognizing both sides' fundamental legitimacy. I, as an Israeli, am willing to say there's a Palestinian people with a historic connection to the land and a right to self-determination and a state of its own. That's the position of the Israeli government. That's been the position of successive Israeli governments. Unfortunately, up until now, and I hope it changes, the Palestinian leadership has not used the same language when they talk about my side. They refuse to say there's a Jewish people with a historic connection to the soil, with a right to a state of its own. And how can you have peace if you negate the very legitimacy of the other side's existence? It's impossible. I want to stress, though, this is not a precondition. Israel places no preconditions on resumption talks. We're ready to meet immediately with the Palestinians. But we think to get a peace agreement, to end successfully the negotiations, the Palestinians have to accept Jewish peoplehood, just as we've accepted Palestinian peoplehood. That's the fundamental equation on which peace must be built.
And Owen, I'll give you a chance in a few minutes' time to tell us what you've made of Mr. Regev's answer. But let's bring in Samir, who's with us live from Cairo. She normally lives in Gaza and is joining us live. Samir, go ahead and ask your question of Mr. Regev.
Thank you, sir. Well, actually, I'm 23 years old, and for the past 20 years of my life, I've been hearing about nothing but more of negotiations and peace process and so on. And that led us to nothing but more concessions on the Palestinian side and to a real bad status quo right now. And could the Israelis actually give the Palestinians any guarantees that they would grant the Palestinians a state on the 67 borders with the right of return, with Jerusalem, with the settlement removed, with the the wall, the separate wall, removed with the Gaza, which is besieged, lifting the Gaza on the siege
So,
on
Samir,
the
let's give
Gaza
Mark Regev
Strip.
a chance to that. Mr. Regev, can you offer a guarantee that this state of Palestine would be based on the 67 borders and that the wall, which currently runs along the border of the West Bank, would be taken down?
I'll answer that, but let me please address the first part of the question. She said, as a Palestinian, she's frustrated that the peace process has not succeeded yet. And I can tell you, we share the same sentiment. Israelis are also frustrated that the peace process has up until now not produced a final peace agreement. And so we're just as frustrated as you are, and we share that in common. I would ask you, though, as a Palestinian, and I think it's a fair question.
But
You've
Mr.
had
Regev,
successive
with respect,
Israeli governments who put on the table...
with respect, we've got 1 minute left, and she's asking you whether you can give her certain assurances. It's possible to answer that relatively briefly. Would you support a state based on the 67 borders and with the wall taken down?
Well, the security fence is a necessary security measure because we've got suicide bombers who want to come into Israel and kill our people. If there weren't suicide bombers, I think in Israel we'd be very happy to take it down. On the other issues, where our position is clear, we say all the core issues of the conflict, not just the issue of borders, the issue of settlements, the issue of Jerusalem, the issue of security, of course, the issue of refugees, the issue of legitimacy, all those issues have to be on the table. The Palestinians can bring all their concerns, we'll bring our concerns, let's negotiate. How can you hope to bridge the gaps unless you talk? And I'd ask the Palestinians, why do you boycott Israel? Why do you refuse to talk to Israel? How do you expect to solve problems?
We're going to be speaking to Palestinians in the next 30 minutes here on World Have Your Say, so we'll put that question to them. Mr. Regev, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the UN. Before Mr. Regev, we spoke to Hussam Zomlit from the Palestinian delegation. Thanks to him as well. We'll get your reaction to what they had to say in a few minutes' time. Well, let's bring in our first few guests. We have Samir, a Palestinian blogger who's live with us from Cairo, though she lives in Gaza. Owen is an Israeli lawyer and a student. He's in Jerusalem. And Noor is a coordinator of the national campaign for Palestine 194, and she is live from Ramallah. Well, let's first of all speak to Owen. What did you make of what Mark Regev had to say about how he would define a Jewish state?
Well, it seems to me this is the key question. If we're making this demand, we ought to be able to spell it out. My sense, not necessarily only from this answer, is our government really doesn't know at all what it means. But I did think he said a few interesting things. He said, first of all, what it means is recognizing that there is a Jewish people. Second, it means recognizing that the Jewish people has a historic connection to the land. And third, that the Jewish people has a right to self-determination. I guess my point was that we have this demand about a Jewish state, and it ends up becoming binary. Israeli politicians slam on the table and demand it. The Palestinians throw up their hands and refuse. And we get nowhere. Why not break it down into pieces and ask the Palestinians to accept those pieces? So here, instead of having an agreement say the Palestinians hereby accept Israel as a Jewish state, we could have an agreement that says the Palestinians hereby accept that the Jewish people exists, that it has a historical connection to the land, and that it has a right to self-determination. I'm not saying this is necessarily the right list, but I think that whatever negotiating process there is, and I certainly hope there will be one, I hope it goes down this direction, because otherwise this is just stuck.
And those of you watching in Israel, I'm curious to know what you made of Mr. Regev's response to Owen's question. Do call us up. We'll call you back if you come on air. It's +44 2070 83 72 72. Just before we speak to the other two guests, let's bring in Danny from the World Have Your Say team, who's been looking across all the calls that have been coming in. What have you got for us, Danny?
Well, in the last few minutes, we've had calls from France, Iraq, Brazil, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Jordan, Singapore, the Gambia, Sierra Leone and Russia. Now, key issues, some people saying that the Palestinians have tried everything else, so why not this? But others saying the Palestinians haven't done enough to show that they actually want peace. Now, also taking a lot of calls about double standards, whether that be to do with the USA, the Israelis, or indeed the Palestinians themselves. Well, main hashtags that are trending on Twitter at the moment are Palestine, statehood, UN vote, and of course the one that you see on the bottom of your screens.
Thank you very much indeed, Danny. Yes, we're looking across all of those hashtags, so whichever one you use will pick it up. But why certainly gets you straight to the world have your say team. Asmin in Singapore says on Facebook, the US supported change in Libya and Egypt, but closes its eyes to the Palestinian cause. There we have that accusation of hypocrisy again. Jaipur has tweeted us from India to say, for a month now, Abbas has been telling everyone about his move, but Israel never tells anyone what issues they want to talk about. Well, Jaipur, Mr. Regev did give some details, so maybe tweet us back to tell us if that was satisfactory to you. Now, let's bring in Samir live from Cairo. Samir, tell us about your reaction to what Mr. Regev had to say.
Well, let me respond to you by introducing myself again to you. I'm actually a Palestinian who has been living in the Gaza Strip for the past 23 years of my life. I've been living in a direct, brutal occupation. I've witnessed a brutal war that lasted for 23 days. I was living under a siege that has been lasting for 5 years, and it's still continuing. I've been living the fear. I've been living the fear of loss. I've been living the fear of even crossing the borders. I've been granted a scholarship, and for the past 2 months, I've been living the fear of just not being able to go out. All these things have been actually recognized by the UN as illegal.
Samir, though, you asked
did that change anything on the ground?
Samir, you asked
did that change anything on the ground?
You asked Mr. Regev about the wall that separates the West Bank from Israel. He said that couldn't come down for security reasons because people want to cross into Israel and bomb Israelis. Do you think that was a satisfactory answer to you?
Well, it is really saddening that everybody is talking. Even Obama in his last speech was really concentrating on the fact that Israel needs security, while he didn't actually see the fear that we are living here in the Gaza Strip, the children that are being shelled every day because they are being accused as terrorists just because they are Gazans, just because they are living in the Gaza Strip, a territory that is being recognized by the whole world as a terrorist territory, which is not true.
Thank you, Samir. Let's also bring in Noor, who asked a question of Mr. Regev, several, in fact, from Ramallah. You had quite an exchange with Mark Regev, Noor. What did you make of it?
Well, I would understand why Mr. Regev would be nervous. He has a tough position to defend. And let me just explain to the viewers, I'm kind of speaking loudly because there's a party behind me, so I wasn't shouting. I was just speaking over the music. I wasn't satisfied with any of the answers I got. I didn't expect him to be able to defend or explain his position. I really I feel sad for the majority of the Israelis that I know want a two-state solution, because this government is committed to investing in occupation of my land. They're investing in building settlements on my land against international law, in keeping that wall that the world says is illegal and must be dismantled, in building more walls of hatred between the two peoples rather than doing what needs to be done. This is not nuclear physics here. Everybody knows what the solution is, and the solution is Israel has to leave the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem. I have yet to hear someone say that.
Let me jump in here because we want to have a conversation, but let me ask you a favour. Let's ask my director, Nick, if we can pull Noor up full screen. And Noor, can you just describe to us what's behind you, how many people there are, what the music is coming from, what people are doing?
Well, there's quite a crowd behind me. I don't know if your cameraman can, but there's quite a crowd behind me, a few hundred people at least. And they've been gathering here for the past 3 hours or so, even though as the national campaign, we invited them to come around half an hour ago, only to start coming around 6 p.m. Palestine time. But there's that much energy in the air. They've come here to have a party, to celebrate Palestinians' doing what they want done, and that is applying for statehood, and to listen into the speech of the Palestinian president. That's basically what the crowd is here to do. There's a very festive mood outside.
I appreciate you showing this to us. I'm curious to ask anyone who is sharing that excitement that we're seeing with Noor there in Ramallah, is there a danger that that excitement might turn to anger and lead to unrest if this full membership doesn't go ahead? Because after all, there are some major obstacles between this request and it actually happening. The main one being America saying if it goes to the Security Council and 9 of the 15 members of that Security Council support this idea, the US will veto it. So if you are sharing that excitement, might the excitement turn to anger? Do call us, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. I can look at my list of countries here of where you're calling from: Sweden, Albania, Finland, Belgium, Afghanistan. We will get as many of you on the air as we can. Remember, if we don't get you on the air, we'll also sometimes write up the comments that you call in and put them on the screen so we can share them with people that way. OK, let's pull up a message here from Bobby, who's tweeted from the UK, who says, "For once, I agree with Sarkozy. It's time someone other than America became the lead mediator between Israel and Palestine." I just wonder, Owen, in Jerusalem, whether you agree that now America really is losing its right to this role.
Well, who would replace America? I don't know. I don't personally see the answer to that question.
The European Union is being suggested.
But do they really have the ability to carry the process forward? Do they really have the ability to give Israel the comfort that Israel would need in order for Israel to make the concessions it wants? The U.S. obviously there's all the talk that we're all aware of, the declining status of the United States in the region and in the world. But at the end of the day, the U.S. is still a superpower. It's still the most powerful country in the world, and it's hard to see how a process could work without the U.S. playing, if not the only role, at least a major role.
And those of you watching, do you think America is still in the best position to be the mediator? Tweet us using the WISE hashtag. We'll get reaction not just to what Mark Regev was saying, but also what Hussam Zomlat had to say. Speaking before Mark Regev, he's with the Palestinian delegation at the UN. He also answered your questions. In a couple of minutes' time, we'll hear what you made of what he had to say. I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks very much for tuning to BBC World News and joining me for World Have Your Say. We've been hearing the Israeli government spokesperson and a spokesperson for the Palestinian delegation at the UN answering your questions. Now we're hearing you react to what they had to say. By the way, I understand Mahmoud Abbas has arrived at the UN. He's expected to speak at around 16:30 GMT, so in around 45 minutes' time at the UN. Benjamin Netanyahu will follow him shortly afterwards. Those timings aren't precise, though, so just be assured that whenever Mahmoud Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu start speaking, you'll see both speeches live here on BBC World News. Sarmand in Iran has emailed saying, "I have no problem with Israel, but after 60 years, this struggle must finish. I support the new state of Palestine." And Douglas in Australia has also emailed, "The subservience to the Israel lobby in Washington shows a hypocrisy which beggars belief," he writes, "given US support for the Arab Spring." And that is a recurring theme in a lot of the messages that you're sending in. Now, let's bring in a couple of callers because we've heard from Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Denmark, Switzerland and Portugal in the past few minutes. Natasha joins us on the phone now. Natasha, tell us where you are and tell us your point as well.
Okay, I'm calling from Nigeria. I live in Nigeria, but I'm originally from Russia. And basically what I want to say is that sometimes it's necessary to look at the point of view of Israel. The world in its wisdom allowed the creation of Israel. But ever since then, it's been unfairly treated by Arab world and also by many countries in Europe. And I feel they need a fair treatment. If they do not agree to creation of Palestine at this point in time, I believe they have a good reason. Not that they have...
Let me jump in there just because we've got a lot of calls coming through, but thank you very much for joining us and making your point. I can see that the AFP Newswire is writing, Abbas asked UN to admit state of Palestine. So we knew it was coming, but that confirms that the process is now underway. Let's switch from Natasha to Ezra, who's also on the phone. Ezra, tell us where you are and the point you would like to make.
Hello. I'd like to say that the Palestinian people deserve their statehood and all that it entails, their official recognition, endorsement by international organizations, and the ability to deal with Israel on more equal footing, and opportunity to live in peace and security. The U.S. must stop hindering Palestinian rights at the United Nations. This is a long overdue and delayed decision to give Palestine justice and all her withheld legal rights. And for some interesting reason, the U.S. seems to be forever an attorney for Israel, who loves to play the role of a spoiled brat who gets away with anything and everything, including the murder of the peaceful, unarmed civilian activists on board the flotilla in international waters.
Why? That's a subject which we discussed just a little while ago, and of course that's had very damaging impact on Turkey's relationship with Israel. The death of some Turkish activists on that flotilla headed to Gaza in 2010. I can see the Reuters news agency is writing, UN spokesman confirms that Abbas has handed Palestinian application to UN Secretary General. So the process, which Ezra said has been long delayed, is underway. Remember, though, the US has confirmed it will veto any full membership plans of the UN for Palestine if need be. Now, let's bring in a couple more guests to speak with you. We have Asha in the Netherlands, who has served in the Israeli army in the past. Asha, you were asking our guest, Mr. Zomlot, the Palestinian spokesperson, about recognizing a Jewish state. Were you satisfied with the answer you received?
No, he evaded the answer, unfortunately, and this is, in my view, the very core of the issue. I think that most Israelis would be more than happy to generously compromise with the Palestinians and create a Palestinian state and do anything to support that, but not before Israel is recognized as a Jewish state.
Thank you very much for joining us, Asha. We appreciate it. Yavita in Kabul has just asked, what happens if, despite a US veto, there's a majority of non-permanent members voting in favour? Well, Yavita, I can answer that. There are 15 members of the Security Council. If 9 support the motion, then it will be passed unless one of the countries which holds a veto vetoes the idea. Of course, one of those countries is America. So even if 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, or even 14 of the members supported it, if America decides it's not going to happen, it will not happen. OK, let's bring in Layla. She writes the Gaza Mom blog, and she asked a question of Mr. Zomlot, the Palestinian representative. What did you make of the question you asked and the answer you received?
I mean, you have to understand why, and Samiha brought this up earlier, so many Palestinians in diaspora, but also in Gaza and within the 1948 territories are suspicious of this initiative because their voices are not being represented here. And the PA was complicit in besieging Gaza over the past few years. But also, I think it's divorced from the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is the settlement enterprise has doubled since the Oslo Accords. 5,200 new illegal colonial units were built just in July alone. Nearly 400 Palestinian homes were demolished. The current situation is untenable, but so is a two-state solution. I think the only way to go here is for Mahmoud Abbas to lead a popular and civil struggle for a democratic single state. Israel as an apartheid regime, which it has become and has been described that way by Israeli prime ministers themselves, is just not sustainable.
I'm not sure Israeli prime ministers would describe it that way, but Layla, we appreciate you coming on. Bethany in Washington, D.C., I just don't have time to bring you in. I know that you would vehemently disagree with what Layla was having to say. I can see you nodding there as well. Perhaps we can speak to you on our radio edition, which starts in just over an hour's time. You can listen to that wherever you are in the world at bbcworldservice.com. If you want to carry on the discussion right now, head to facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. And remember that Mahmoud Abbas will be speaking shortly at the UN. He'll be followed not long after by Benjamin Netanyahu. You'll see both speeches live here on BBC World News. Speak to you soon. Goodbye.